While my son was praising his perfect wife, my lawyer sent a warning bulletin from the Belgian police with her face printed on it. 3 years. That's how long I had lived as a guest in my own home, guarding a secret that could destroy everything. My son, Leo, believed he was the master of the Valombre estate. His wife, Isabelle, believed it even more. They didn't know that the real deed of ownership was in my safe, a testament to the day I had to save this legacy from my son's downfall. I kept silent, observing. I watched as Isabelle, with the smile of an angel, systematically replaced my family's heritage with counterfeits. I knew the true value of the coin collection that had disappeared. I knew the landscape painting in the library was nothing more than a lifeless copy. And I knew the sapphire on Isabelle's neck was not my mother's stone. In his blindness of love, my son called it brilliant management. I called it a silent invasion. The question wasn't whether she was a fraud. The question was, how big was her plan, and when would she strike the final blow? I had my answer, and I waited, not in fear, but like a hunter, waiting for her prey to come into her sights. I needed a mistake, a public, undeniable act of arrogance. And tonight, at the party staged as a coronation, Isabelle decided to drop the curtain herself. She thought this was her night, the night to assert absolute power. She didn't know that this was, in fact, my night. As dessert was served, she gave me exactly what I needed. Isabelle stood up and lightly tapped a fork against her wineglass. A hush fell over the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice as sweet as honey. "Tonight, I have a special announcement. As you all know, my mother Elena has dedicated her life to traditional values. This Valombre estate, under the care of Leo and me, is becoming more modern and dynamic." She paused, looking at me with a look of feigned concern. "I know this change might feel unfamiliar to you, Mother, so we have prepared a gift for you." She gestured, and an assistant brought a folder and placed it in front of me. The cover showed a quaint, secluded cottage in the countryside. "We found a lovely little house in the country," Isabelle continued, her voice full of filial piety. "A quiet, traditional place that perfectly suits your tastes. You can move there to retire, away from the noise of modern life." The silence in the dining room became suffocating. This was not a gift, but an eviction notice, wrapped in the cellophane of filial piety. She was publicly declaring that my time was up, and that she, as the new mistress, was arranging my future. Leo looked completely shocked. He clearly had no idea about this plan. Isabelle looked directly at me, her eyes sparkling with a victorious glint. "I know this is a big decision, but it's time for you to rest. What do you think?" Her arrogance had blinded her. I took a deep breath, not even glancing at the folder. I smiled, a cold smile. "Isabelle," my voice rang out, steady. "Your idea is very thoughtful, but I wonder, why did you have to go to all this trouble?" Isabelle was slightly taken aback by my question, but she quickly regained her composure. She looked at me as if explaining to a child. "Because it's time for a change, Mother. This place needs a true owner, someone with a vision for the future, not someone who only clings to the past." Her voice grew sharper, no longer hidden. "To prove who has the right to decide here, I need to rearrange everything, starting with what is no longer suitable." "And I am that unsuitable thing?" I asked, my voice still calm. "Exactly," she replied, without a moment's hesitation. "You belong to another era. Your presence here hinders Valombre's growth, and Leo's as well. I'm doing what's best for this family." Leo stood up abruptly, stuttering. "Isabelle, what are you saying?" "That's my mother." But Isabelle ignored him. Her eyes remained fixed on me, full of defiance. She was so confident that she no longer needed to pretend, publicly stating her intention to remove me to seize power. "Thank you for being so clear," I said, my cold smile deepening. "That makes things much easier. But there's one very big problem with your plan." The smile on Isabelle's lips froze. I looked her straight in the eye. "Because this Valombre estate, which you so proudly show off on social media, belongs to me. Completely to me." A murmur spread around the table. Leo looked at me, his face pale. "Mother, what are you saying?" I didn't look at him, my eyes still fixed on Isabelle, who was beginning to lose her composure. 3 years ago, when Leo went bankrupt and couldn't bear the burden of this legacy, I used all my personal assets to buy it back. The money you and Leo send me every month, I paused, delivering the final blow. That's rent, my dear girl. The entire party was stunned into silence. Isabel's face was as white as a sheet. All her plans, all her self-satisfaction, collapsed in that moment. I stood up, adjusting the shawl on my shoulders. My voice became cold and resolute, repeating the very ultimatum she had just given me, but with a completely different outcome. You and Leo have 30 days. Start looking for somewhere more modern to live, a place that suits the budget of an art curator without a gallery. I turned and walked out of the dining room, leaving them to deal with the mess. The storm had only just begun, and I knew this was just the first act. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the library, Louise's favorite room, and waited. I knew the real storm wouldn't come from Isabel, at least not immediately. She was too smart to act rashly. The storm would come from my own son, from his confusion and hurt. And just as I predicted, at the break of dawn, the heavy footsteps of Leo echoed in the hallway, followed by an angry knock on the door. He walked in, his face haggard after a sleepless night, his eyes red and swollen from both shock and anger. "Why, Mother?" His voice was broken, full of hurt. "Why did you humiliate us in front of everyone? Why did you hide the truth about this house from me?" I put down my teacup and looked my son straight in the eye. My voice held no reproach, only the naked truth. "Because I wanted you to feel like the master of Villambre, Leo. I wanted you to hold your head high, to stand on your own 2 feet after that fall, not to live like a failure being taken care of by me. I gave you your self-respect." I paused, letting my words sink in. "But self-respect cannot be built on disrespecting others, Leo. You heard what Isabel said. She didn't just disrespect me. She wanted to erase my existence from this very house." Leo fell silent, the anger in his eyes slowly replaced by confusion. He knew what Isabel had done was wrong, but he still loved his wife. She was just too frank, Mother. She didn't mean it. "Really?" I asked softly, leaving the question hanging in the air. That afternoon, it was Isabel's turn. She came alone, carrying a bouquet of expensive white peonies. Her perfect face was tear-streaked, her eyes swollen. She sobbed, saying she had been under too much pressure, that she just wanted to fit in, to prove herself in a family that was too great, and that her words last night were just because she was tipsy. It was a perfect performance of remorse. I just listened in silence. I had seen too many plays in my life to be moved by such a clumsy performance. "I accept your apology," I said when she finished, my voice even, without a hint of emotion. "But the ultimatum still stands. 29 days. The despair in her eyes disappeared for a moment, replaced by a cold glint, but it was quickly covered by a new sob. A few days later, with the atmosphere in the house still tense, I decided to clean the living room myself. As I dusted the bookshelf, my eyes fell on a small impressionist painting that Isabel had proudly brought home a few months ago. She boasted that she had bought it for an unbelievable bargain from a private collection. Leo had praised his wife's discerning eye. I took the painting down. With the experience of a person who had spent her life in art, I didn't need a magnifying glass. I recognized it immediately. The brushwork lacked the freedom of a master. The colors were too fresh, without the depth of time. The oil paint layers lacked the natural micro-cracks. It was a fake, a clumsy copy. I put the painting back in its place, but my mind was in turmoil. Why would a sophisticated art curator like Isabel buy such an obvious fake? Or, she wasn't fooled at all. She did it on purpose. The question then was, where did the money Leo had given her to buy this artwork really go? A small crack had just appeared in the perfect portrait that Isabel had so painstakingly painted, and I knew if I kept prying, the whole picture would shatter. I didn't have to wait long. The answer came to me in an unexpected way, not through an antique, but through something completely modern, a text message. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon. I was reading in the garden when my phone vibrated. It was a message from Isabel. I thought it was another plea, but when I opened it, I stopped. The content wasn't meant for me. Plan B must be initiated. The old lady is starting to sniff around. Meet me at the old cafe. Bring the documents. Every word in the message was like a splash of cold water in my face. Old lady, Plan B, documents. This was not the language of a remorseful daughter-in-law. This was the language of a conspirator. I took a screenshot immediately, then calmly texted back a single sentence. Perhaps you sent this message to the wrong person, Isabel. Less than 10 minutes later, Isabel rushed into the house without even knocking. Her perfect hair was a mess, her face completely drained of color. Utter panic. Mother, I can explain, she gasped. I sat still on the chair, put my book down, my hand still holding the phone. I said nothing, just held up the screen with the message for her to see. Her eyes were glued to it. Then she collapsed onto the floor, tears beginning to stream down. Another act, but this time even more desperate. She fabricated a tragic story about a dark past, an old gambling debt she was trying to hide from Leo. The man in the message, according to her, was an old friend helping her settle everything quietly. The documents were just a loan agreement. Please, Mother, she sobbed, crawling to my feet. Please don't tell Leo. He'll be devastated. I just want to protect him. She acted very well. But I was no longer an innocent audience. The intuition of a person who had lived most of her life told me this was a lie. A lie hastily concocted to cover up a much bigger truth. If it was just an old debt, why call me an old lady? Why was there a plan B? And most importantly, what documents had to be brought to a secret meeting like that? I looked down at my crying daughter-in-law, but there was no pity in my heart, only a cold resolve. Her mask had fallen, revealing a conspiracy I still didn't fully understand. And I knew I had to find out the truth before her plan B could be executed. I didn't believe a word of Isabel's, "Ah, no." Her act might fool Leo, but it couldn't fool me. Immediately after she left, I took action. I knew the cafe she mentioned. It was a discreet place in the next town. I drove there, sat in my car across the street, and waited. Half an hour later, Isabel arrived, followed by a tall, well-dressed man. He didn't look like a debt collector at all. I quietly raised my phone and took a few clear pictures of his face as they exchanged a file. That very evening, I sent the photos to Bernard, my husband's old friend. He was not only our family lawyer, but also had a wide network of contacts in private security throughout Europe. I made a simple request. Bernard, please tell me who this man is. 2 days later, the answer arrived. Not a call, but an email with an encrypted attachment. Bernard wrote only one line. Elena, you should sit down before you open this file. My heart pounded as I opened the file. The information on the screen made me hold my breath. The man in the photo was named Julien Dubois. He wasn't a lover, nor a creditor. He was Isabelle Dubois' biological brother. But that wasn't the most horrifying thing. Below his personal information was an old scanned article from a Belgian newspaper with a large headline, "Warning: Con artist siblings specialize in targeting wealthy families." I read every word, and my whole world seemed to collapse. The article detailed Isabel and Julien's modus operandi. Isabel, with her beautiful and educated appearance, would approach and seduce single men, often naive and trusting heirs. Meanwhile, Julien, posing as a financial expert or investor, would provide support from behind. They specialized in staging perfect love and marriage stories, from which they would slowly drain the victim's assets through phantom investments, inflated invoices, and the sale of valuable items. Everything suddenly became painfully clear. Leo's entire marriage was a play. Isabel's approach to my son, their love, was all part of a meticulously calculated fraud scheme. The fake painting, the swapped necklace, the collection of coins sold cheaply. All of them were not isolated acts of greed. They were systematic steps to bleed money, and I realized their ultimate goal was not just the individual items. Their ultimate goal was the entire Valambri estate, the entire legacy of my family. I sat motionless in front of the computer screen, feeling both disgust and pain. My son didn't just marry a bad wife. He fell into the trap of professional fraudsters. And I, by keeping the secret about the house's ownership, had inadvertently become the last obstacle they didn't anticipate. The plan B they mentioned was probably to deal with me. I had no other choice. This truth, no matter how cruel, Leo had to know. I called my son to the library, the room that had now become the center of the battle. I didn't say much, just quietly turned the computer screen toward him. On it was everything. The photo of Isabel meeting Julian, his identity file, and the bolded headline from the Belgian newspaper. I also placed another folder next to it that lawyer Bernard had helped me gather. Copies of Isabel's secret bank statements, showing large sums of money transferred after each time a family antique was sold or restored. Leo stared at the screen. First came confusion, then disbelief, and finally a quiet collapse. He didn't scream, didn't smash anything. He just sat down in the chair, his hands clutching his head and his body trembling. The wife he loved, the woman he had wholeheartedly defended in front of me, was just an illusion. His entire marriage, his love, was a perfectly set trap. I saw the innocence in my son's eyes shatter, leaving behind deep pain and shame. I'm such a fool," he whispered, his voice cracking. I placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're not a fool, Leo. You just trusted the wrong person. Now we have to end this." The next day, Isabel and Julian came to the estate together. Clearly, they didn't know that I knew everything. They thought I was just a lonely old lady who could be easily intimidated or bought off. They came to execute Plan B. They walked into the living room, Julian holding a folder of documents. Isabel began her tearful performance again. "Mother, please," she sobbed. "I know you're angry, but please think of Leo. Julian just wants to help us settle things. If you just sign these papers, agreeing to transfer a portion of the ownership to Leo, the bank will give us a loan to start over." I calmly interrupted her, my voice as cold as ice. "To help you complete your 8th scam. Isn't that right, Miss Dubois?" Both their faces changed. The name Dubois I had just uttered was like a thunderclap. Their act collapsed. Isabel stammered, "Mother, what are you saying?" "I'm talking about the families in Belgium, in the Netherlands," I continued, standing up to face them. "I'm talking about the people you have deceived, whose lives you have ruined. Valambre will be your final stop." Julian tried to say something, probably a threat, but just then, the large living room door opened. Police Chief Antoine, an old friend of my husband, walked in with 2 officers. Leo stood right behind him, his eyes no longer holding weakness, only a cold determination. "Isabel and Julian Dubois," Police Chief Antoine said, his voice firm. "You are under arrest for organized fraud at the request of the Belgian police and the Valambre family's complaint." Utter panic was clearly visible on Isabel's face. All her calculations, all her confidence, vanished. The sight of her being handcuffed and led away from the Valambre estate, passing by the portraits of my ancestors, was the final curtain call for her scam. The door slammed shut, restoring the house's inherent peace. After the police left, the Valambre estate fell into a deep silence. But this was no longer the heavy silence of secrets and tension. This was the stillness after a storm had passed, when the air becomes fresh and everything is washed clean. For the first time in years, I felt I could breathe deeply in my own home. A few weeks later, when the legal procedures were gradually settling, I found Leo sitting alone in the garden. It was a late spring afternoon, the golden sunlight pouring over the lavender beds that were beginning to bud, and the hills of Provence looked so gentle in the distance. He no longer had the devastated look of that day, but sadness still lingered in his eyes. I sat down next to him, not saying a word. We were silent together, looking out at the familiar scenery. After a long while, it was Leo who spoke, his voice hoarse. "I've spent the whole week going over everything. The invoices, the emails. How could I have been so blind?" "It wasn't blindness, Leo," I said gently. "It was love. You fell in love with a portrait she painted, not her true self." He nodded, a single tear rolling down his cheek. "I've lost a wife, lost 3 years of my life." "No," I took his hand. "You lost an illusion. But you found yourself again. You found Valambre again. And you found our connection again." He looked at me, and for the first time in a long time, I saw the look of my little boy again, a look full of trust and gratitude. We didn't need to say anything more. The wound was still there, but it would heal. The healing process had begun. When I stood alone in the dining room that evening, looking up at the portrait of Louis, my husband, I smiled. Isabel was right about one thing. The past can't be clung to forever, but it's also not something to be discarded. It's the foundation for us to build the future. The legacy of Valambra is not just land or antique paintings. It's the resilience forged through generations. It's the wisdom to distinguish what is real from what is fake, not just in antiques, but in people's hearts as well. And sometimes, to protect what is most genuine, we must be ruthless with what is false. The battle was over. Valambre was at peace, and I, Elena de Valambre, its protector, could finally rest.